Good morning. Today's class, we will be looking at the relative clauses. Let's look at an example. This is Yahweh who vanquished death, which killed the butcher, who slew the ox, which drank the water, which quenched the fire, which burnt the stick, which bet the cat, which kills the kid. What is special about this sentence? You might have noted that the main clause in the sentence is this is Yahweh, and everything else is added to this. So, who vanquished death is a description of Yahweh, which killed the butcher is a description of death, who slew the ox is a description of the butcher, which drank the water is a description of the ox, and so on. So, here we call all the clauses which start with the WH relative pronoun as relative clauses. So, what is special about this sentence? Here, the main clause is followed by a series of relative clauses. The relative clauses wind round the main clause like a thread around a ball. We see that the relative clauses used here are who and which. So, who refers to uh, the nouns which have a life, and which represents the nouns which are non-human. Now, let's take a closer look at the relative clauses. What exactly is the function of a relative clause? It functions mostly like an adjective. It qualifies a noun. Look at the example. The evil that men do lives after them. Here, the evil lives after them is the main clause. That men do is a relative clause. Now, what does that men do? What does that clause mean? It functions like an adjective and it qualifies the noun evil. The evil that men do lives after them. So here the evil is the noun and that men do is a relative clause which functions like an adjective. When we look at relative clauses, we understand that there are two types of relative clauses. The first one is what we call the adjectival clause, and the second one is a sentence relative. We'll look into detail of each one of them. Adjectival clause. Relative clauses are usually called by this name, adjectival clause. An adjectival clause is joined to another clause by means of relative pronouns like who, whom, that, whose, which, to whom, etc. So basically, a relative clause is joined to a main clause. Remember the example we said in the beginning. This is Yahweh, this is Yahweh who vanquished death, which killed the butcher. So here there is a main clause and the adjectival clauses are joined to the main clause using relative pronouns like who, whom, that, whose, which, to whom, etc. Now relative pronouns usually perform two functions. The first function is it functions either as the subject or the object. It replaces the subject or the object. Look at the example. Those whom the gods love die young. Now here those is the subject and whom the gods love is the relative clause. Whom is the relative pronoun here. Whom replaces the subject those. So it can either function as a subject or an object. Look at another example. The boy who fought the tiger was killed. Now here the boy who fought the tiger, here who fought the tiger is a relative clause. Who is the relative pronoun and who here functions like the subject. It's a pronoun, it's a relative pronoun which replaces the subject, the boy. Now, the second function of a relative pronoun is that it joins two clauses like a conjunction. So it does the function of a conjunction. It brings together, conjoins two sentences or two clauses. Look at the two examples given below. She brought home a picture that was a genuine Rembrandt. Now, the same two sentences can be combined together using that as a conjunction. That is a relative pronoun. The picture that she brought home was a genuine Rembrandt. Now, that is a relative pronoun, and relative pronouns can join two clauses like a conjunction, as we saw in the example. Adjectival clauses or any relative clause forms or belongs to defining or non-defining. It belongs to these two categories. A relative clause which identifies the noun it qualifies is called a defining relative clause. Look at the example, the last sentence of this slide. My brother, who is a doctor, is leaving for Mumbai. Now, here, the context is the speaker has two or three brothers, and the speaker wants to specify which brother is going to Mumbai. So, in that case, the speaker would refer to the brother's occupation or refer to a particular feature of that brother. And that's why my brother, who is a doctor, is leaving for Mumbai, is a defining relative clause. Because the relative clause here is necessary for the sentence to make meaning. Now, what is a non-defining relative clause? A non-defining relative clause is one that merely imparts additional information. So here, non-defining relative clause is an additional information, and you actually don't need that non-defining relative clause in order to make sense of the sentence. So even if you remove the non-defining relative clause, it will not affect the structure of the sentence since the main clause is complete in itself. And usually it is easy to identify whether it is defining or non-defining because non-defining relative clauses are usually separated by commas or dashes. Now, the same sentence that we said can be non-defining. My brother, who is a doctor, is leaving for Mumbai. Now, in this case, the speaker has only one brother, and the speaker does not need to give additional information to talk about that brother. So that's why we called it non-defining. And in the last example, it is a defining relative clause. I hope it is clear. Let me give you another example. This is the engineer who built the bridge. This is the engineer who built the bridge. Now here, this is the engineer is not complete in itself. We need we need extra information about that person to make the sentence complete. If I say this is the engineer, then the listener would naturally feel in his mind, so what? So what we need to do is we need to give complete information using a relative pronoun. That's why this is the engineer who built the bridge. Here, who built the bridge is a defining relative clause because you need that relative clause in order to make sense of that sentence or the clause. Now, the bridge that was built by the engineer is strong. Now, in this case, your intention is to say that the bridge is strong. Now, that was built by the engineer is an additional information given here. So in this case, that was built by the engineer is an extra information and you call it a non-defining relative clause. I hope it is clear now. We need a defining relative clause in a sentence because it is needed to make the sentence complete. Non-defining relative clauses are usually additional information given. Moving on. The second type of relative clause is what we call the sentence relatives. Remember, in the first one, we said that adjectival clauses are ones which function like an adjective and qualifies one particular noun of that sentence. But here, sentence relatives are the relative pronoun. Here, the relative pronoun refers to the entire sentence. Now, look at the two examples given below. Jack showed me a picture which represented me as a monkey. Will you identify the relative pronoun here? Yes. Which is the relative pronoun? So, which represents or which refers to the single noun picture. So, in that first case, it is an additional, it is an adjectival clause. Look at the second sentence. I tore up the picture, which greatly upset Jack. Now, here, which is not an adjectival clause because it is not referring to a single noun, but it refers to the entire sentence. I tore up the picture. The entire act of tearing a picture has upset Jack. So, such sentences, such relative pronouns which refer to the entire sentence are called sentence relatives. Now, sentence relatives are usually introduced by whereon, whereupon, and which. Let's take another example. A madman was aiming blows at an imaginary enemy, which amused us very much. Now, here we know that the entire action of the man aiming blows at the entire enemy is what amuses the person who is watching the madman. So, it is a sentence relative. I hope that is clear. Now, we also need to understand the differences between the WH relative pronouns and that which comes as a relative pronoun. This will help you use relative pronouns appropriately. Remember 6 rules with reference to using WH relative pronouns and that relative pronoun. Remember, that is not used to introduce non-defining relative clauses. Usually, non-defining relative clauses are introduced by the WH relative pronoun. We will not use that in order to introduce non-defining relative clauses. Who becomes whom in the objective case, but that does not change. Let's look at the examples, it will be clear. The boy who broke the rules was dismissed. Look at the second example. The boy with whom you had a fight was dismissed. Now, in the first sentence, the boy who broke the rules was dismissed. The boy is the subject. So, the relative pronoun which comes in the subject position is who. But in the second sentence, the boy with whom you had a fight. So, here the boy is an object. Okay, let's look at the sentence. Uh, if you try to, restate the sentence, it would be, I had a fight with the boy, or you had a fight with the boy. So, fight with the boy or the boy here is an object. Okay, so when you want to refer to the boy from the object perspective, you will not use who, but you will use whom. That is the object, that is the relative pronoun in the object position. So, WH relative pronoun changes its form when it comes in the objective case. So, for a subject, to refer to a subject, you will use who. To refer to an object, you will use whom. But it will not change in the case of that. That remains constant. Suppose it was that instead of who, the boy that you called yesterday has arrived, or the boy that broke the rules was dismissed, the boy that uh, fought with you was dismissed. Okay, so that will not change its form depending on whether the noun is subject or object. That's the second rule. Third rule is with regard to prepositions. Prepositions can come before or after the WH relative pronoun. When that is used as a relative pronoun, preposition can come only at the end. Look at the example. This is the hill about which I dreamt yesterday. So when you use a WH relative pronoun, you use the preposition before or after the relative pronoun. But when you use that as a relative pronoun, the preposition comes only towards the end. So remember that. Moving on to the fourth rule. The relative pronoun who is preferred to that if the antecedent is a personal pronoun. Now remember, when we talked about the second rule, we used the sentence, the boy that you called yesterday has arrived. This is not a common usage. We usually use the WH relative pronoun or who, okay, the relative pronoun who to refer to human beings. So who is preferred to that if the antecedent or the noun that comes before the relative pronoun is a personal noun. So the man who came here yesterday was a thief. So because the antecedent or the word which comes before the relative pronoun is a personal name or a human, you will not use that. Instead, you will use who. The man who came here yesterday was a thief. Moving on to the fifth rule. When the antecedent consists of many words, WH relative pronouns are preferred. Look at the example. I have many friends there in the high ranges who really care for me. Now, in this case, the 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 uh, words that come before the relative pronoun are many. Okay, I have many friends who really care for me, is what exactly the speaker means. But to make it more clear, the speaker says, I have many friends there in the high ranges. So you have a lot of words coming together in the antecedent position. So it is preferred that you use the WH relative pronoun there, because otherwise you might mistake it for the high ranges. Okay, if you try to say it like I have many friends there in the high ranges that really care for me, the sentence would mean that the high ranges care for you, not the friends. So it is preferred that you use the WH relative pronoun when the antecedent consists of many words. The last rule, that relative pronoun is common after words like all, everything, anything, and few. So you usually use that after the words like all, everything, anything, and few. A few of the chocolates that were bought yesterday are kept in the fridge. So, because we have a few in the antecedent position, we use that as the relative pronoun. I hope this is clear. So, in today's class, what we did was we looked at relative clauses. We talked about the two different kinds of relative clauses. One is the adjectival clause, which functions like an adjective. The second one is sentence relatives, which where the relative pronoun refers to the entire sentence. Then we talked about the defining and non-defining uh, relative clauses. Defining relative clauses are the ones which are necessary for making sense of the sentence. Non-defining relative clauses are usually additional information imparted to the audience. Then we talked about the six differences between that and the WH relative pronoun. We said that that is not used to introduce non-defining relative clauses. WH relative pronouns usually change their form when it comes to the subject and the object position, but that does not change. We said that WH relative pronouns can have prepositions before or after it. But that, when you use that as a relative pronoun, usually it comes at the end of the sentence. We said that who is preferred to that if the antecedent is a personal pronoun. When the antecedent consists of many words, WH relative pronouns are preferred. And that is commonly used after the words like all, everything, anything, and few. I hope the class was clear. Thank you.